Okay, so I've got some questions prepared. I'll put these to the panel and then I will open it up to yourselves in the audience. So first question is, and I'm going to start with you, Ritu, because I know you took some notes doing that. So it's basically, did any of the films in particular stand out for you, or any particular themes that resonated? And do bring through your work on a personal level if you want to.
Lots. Should I use the thing?
Yes, you can.
Okay, it works. I loved some of the films that we saw today, and I'm sure you did as well. I think I'm going to work backwards, actually. The film with the guy who had the broken record player, I wasn't sure whether I was more sad about his life that was half-lived or the record player being broken. The film was called The Last Letter. It also reminded me of how many people we've seen over 24 years at Club Kali and before that at Shakti that have also had half-lived lives and not felt able to come out or to be able to break through the community pressure of needing to be married, have children, and keep up those kinds of appearances. So, all right, I'll just start with that one because I'm sure other members of the panel would like to talk about other films.
So, so any particular film or themes that resonated?
I think
I've got the list.
Right. I think the film that really resonated was about the two men and the police officers, because I think there's so much shame and alienation, and I think the theme throughout, there was a lot of how to feel visible while feeling the level of shame and sense of having to play possum, as in like playing dead so that you won't be attacked, and the level of chronic stress that comes with being LGBT and its effects on mental health.
I think for me, all of them are amazing films, and I think all of them resonated in some way or another with me. In particular, The Last Letter, the one about the teacher and the mother, and the first one where he works in the office. I think because all those aspects of coming out and being authentic to oneself is really important. So I really feel that every single one of those films, for me, of an older generation, had a lot to offer, and I think what we need to be looking at right at the end with the words about Section 377 and about being human, I completely agree with that 100%, as I'm sure as you all do. And that's why when I tweet, I sometimes put up the tweets that says #WeAreHuman, and especially when I'm being challenged by people who appear to be homophobic, biphobic or transphobic. These are the challenges that I face on a regular basis. So I just want to say that every single film here tonight has been amazing, and that we have to be important to learn that authenticity and being visible, and most importantly being vocal about who you are, is really important, especially with the times that are changing. We seem to be going back into the closet rather than moving forward.
Interesting.
I think for me, I found that I felt like there was a lot of energy being spent throughout the films, and I think energy being spent in a way that was quite negative, like it was hiding yourself, or energy spent fighting for your rights, or energy spent trying to live as the person that you are and that you want to be, and how difficult that is. And I guess it made me think of my own upbringing and how I spent a lot of time spending that energy as well, hiding myself, growing up as a Sri Lankan person in London, and not knowing any other Sri Lankan LGBTQIA+ people, and how difficult that was. And I guess that also speaks to the work that I do at Fearless Futures, because I don't want young people growing up feeling like they've got to hide parts of themselves again, not being their authentic selves. And yeah, I felt that was a really strong theme that came out for me.
Okay, excellent. And this event is funded and part working with Thrive London, which is one of the mayoral initiatives around mental health and well-being. And so we're going to go into that. And Kakan, based on your last answer, I'm going to come to you first on this one. So with South Asian LGBTQ+ communities and mental health and well-being, do you think we're making progress? If yes, where? If not, why?
I think personally speaking, because I'm from Birmingham, you probably gather from my accent, I think there's demographically, things are changing. In London, it's very much politicised, and London seems to be much more progressive and completely a different place, whereas in Birmingham and surrounding areas, we're still very much sort of about 10 or 20 years behind the times. And with the primary school protests that some people are aware of right now, that's triggering a lot of people, me in particular, because it harks back to Section 28, the days of when I was trying to come out, HIV, AIDS, and the rest of it, all the taboos. And I think what's unsettling is the fact that we have two communities clashing and colliding drastically. And for a lot of people who are South Asian and LGBT, it's frightening them in order to come out. I mean, last night I was at another meeting with Southall Black Sisters, and there's only 3 gay South Asian men there. Where was the rest of the community? We had a couple of women from the South Asian community, but where were the men, and where was every other LGBT person that you would expect to be there? So for me, having these sort of times where people are looking at what next, I think this is quite a sad state of affairs, really, because in Birmingham in particular, these protests are from young people, predominantly Muslim people, who are protesting against, what they call indoctrination. But at the same time, I feel that what they're doing is social conditioning as well, and we've started calling it religious homophobia. And this is something, again, that we're challenging on a daily basis, not only in the media, but in our communities as well. In my workplace, I work with homeless people and other people, and they also agree with the protesters, which is quite strange. So it's about where we sit with that. And I just think that, yes, we have same-sex legislation and the Equality Act, but it's not enough. What we need to do is keep on moving forward and keep on fighting until we have equality for everyone.
Excellent. Amira, if you can come in on that. I mean, again, mental health and well-being, that intersection where we're South Asian queers. Are we making progress? And if so, where? And if we're not, why?
Well, I think in the workplace, I work in the NHS, and certainly people have the rainbow lanyards, and there's a encouragement to be oneself, and yet 1 in 8 transgender people find it really hard to come out. There's many people just generally that find it hard to come out in workplaces. I think with young people, I work with 0 to 18-year-olds, and a lot of young people now feel that they can come out, and they say to me their parents accept it. And equally, there's a lot of, mental health problems because people are LGBT, like the suicide rate of transgender is, 10 times normal. The other people, LGBT, self-harm, eating disorders in gay men. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of mental health problems that come with, the social inequality and society and how they treat us, and therefore how we, how it impacts on us. So society hasn't changed that much, I think.
There's mixed. It's progressive for some, but for others not. And Vanessa, you do a lot of work with young people as well.
So I think actually, I think comparing to myself growing up, I grew up with depression, and it's still something that I experience today. And I feel like part of that was also that hiding that I talked about, that energy being spent trying to, live 2 lives. But I think also at the moment, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think there are lots of organisations now for young people like Galdem and Bernd Rotti, who are doing loads of work to kind of highlight people of colour therapists and people who understand your intersectional experience. And that can speak to people. So I think in some ways there are strides, but then there are cuts to funding and issues like that, which then take that back down again.
Of course, go ahead.
Right. I think for us as Asian people, it's really difficult because when you face racism, when you face social rejection and abandonment, we go to our community. And then you're gay, and then they can alienate us too, and then there's nowhere left to go. And I think that makes it so much harder. And I think it's fair to say that some of our Asian and Black communities can be more homophobic than the white communities. And then equally, you can go to white LGBT events, and our Asianness is not represented. So I think that's a really difficult place to be sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's almost a perennial feeling of not belonging and not having a positive self-image. And I think even when we get older, I'm not saying I've gotten older, but those of you that have gotten older, you sometimes that feeling of inadequacy, it never leaves you. It's always there. But I would say that we have made progress. I mean, we've still got a hell of a way to go. Really, really, a big hell of a way to go. But at least mental health is being talked about. It's out in the open to some degree. Maybe not all of us feel able to be out about our mental health yet, because it's still relatively new. This idea of, Prince William and Prince Harry talking about going to therapy. I mean, and I'm just sort of thinking about my friend, Poppy Jaman, who set up Mental Health First Aid, which has now become this huge organisation that delivers training across the corporate sector and various others. And it's a massive thing, that they do now. But maybe 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, I don't think there would have been anybody going into some of these companies down by Moor Riverside and training the staff in their, in well-being and mental health. That wouldn't have happened before.
Okay. I'm going to do one more question around this before we take it up. And this one is about loneliness. And the reason why I bring this about, because it's Thrive London and it's about South Asian LGBTQ Londoners. And there was a British Red Cross report. I've got a copy here, and there's a couple of copies I've left on the table outside. It was actually released last week, a week ago. And the report is Barriers to Belonging, an Exploration of Loneliness Among People from BAME Backgrounds. A couple of things about that. It just says the findings are that discrimination, bullying, and disrespect increase loneliness. People from BAME backgrounds often feel less able to access community activities and support. And there's a loneliness and stigma that comes sometimes with those intersectional identities. There's a second report which was released yesterday, which is the Mayor's report, Survey of Londoners report. Now this says 8% of Londoners often or always feel lonely. 27% of us are socially isolated. Young Londoners and LGBT plus Londoners are more likely to be both lonely and socially isolated. So there's a lot going on there in terms of youth and BAME and LGBT. So the question I want to frame is, us as South Asians, there's always this narrative of big families, extended families. There's just so many of us, parties, weddings, all of that. And then we have the LGBT community, and we say there's so many of us and we can access it and we can do so much in the community. But is loneliness for South Asian queers being overlooked? Is there something there? Khan, I know you've talked about this online and you've shared some stuff about this, so do you want to take them? It's a tough one, but we'll move it up.
Yeah, I think what I find is one of my other roles that I have is in Birmingham, I'm an Aging with Pride ambassador. Basically what we're doing is having a campaign looking at how to connect the two generations of younger generations with older generations, how we can learn from our histories. But I'm also finding that there is a number of people who are somewhat very much isolated, which feeds into their mental health status, leads to depression, low anxiety, self-esteem. I mean, even my own partner, he's not South Asian, but even at the age of 70, he's going to be 70, he feels somewhat isolated now because for his generation, there is nothing for them to go to. And likewise for me, as a brown person, when I was younger, the ironic thing is when I was younger, there wasn't anything there for me in terms of spaces. And now I'm older, there isn't anything there for me except coming into conferences and workshops. So it's quite bizarre. What we need to be looking at is how we connect with the community. And within that community, we have to look at spaces more than pubs and bars and clubs. We do really want more creative spaces like socialization, be more creative. We've got to create spaces where we can feel connected as a community, whether we're old people or younger people. And we also have to look at what we can learn from the past in order to make our futures much better than what they are. I applaud DJ Reed too and Lax because they do what they can, but we're only few individuals within the community, and we're trying our best to create spaces that is safe and comfortable for people to come together. But I think demographically speaking, we need to do a lot more than what we're doing now. It's good that we've got workshops and conferences happening. I mean, I organised the first South Asian LGBT conference last year in the hope that people start networking. But you know what, I've even tried to do a WhatsApp group for lesbian women only. I set it up hoping that people would connect on there. And they didn't, for bizarre reasons. And what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that they're saying that, oh, we're part of Pakistan, or we're Indian, or we're Sikh, or we're Hindu, or something. And everybody's still looking at divisions rather than similarities and looking at what makes us connect. For me, I just think South Asian per se is enough. There's challenges there, but there's also celebrations. So I think in order to move on is that we have to look at, going back to that slide, about how we connect as humans.
Vanessa?
Yes, I mean, I guess in some ways I think that the internet has created opportunities that we didn't have. So when I was growing up, you know, for me it was watching, I don't know if you know Sugar Rush. Watching that was like my only way of not feeling lonely, watching it in secret. But I think now, like, you know, young people in schools, they a lot of them, I mean, again, this is not everyone, and there's an accessibility issue here as well, but you know, a lot of the young people we work with, they have access to the internet. They know how to, you know, using Facebook groups, Instagram, and whatnot to kind of find, you know, communities like them and to be outgoing and find each other and connect. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, there are people from different age groups, you know, who are differently abled, who may not have, you know, that confidence. And again, there's so many barriers that make you, you know, lose confidence and not want to even go and message that person online or that join that group and take that first step to go out and step into the real world and have that conversation. So that, again, there are things that need to be done on that respect. But I do think there's a lot of positive stuff that I see coming out of young people that we work with, and that's beautiful.
That's good. Ritu? Mira?
You know, I was DJing at an event for Galdem yesterday called Queer Britain, and it was Levi's that sponsored the whole thing. And I know my seasoned friend Polemy, who's up there, the photographer as well. You must have had some kind of thoughts about being there. I mean, I felt like I could be the grandmother of most of the people in the room. Just what Kakan was saying earlier about lack of spaces for us to socialise in, come together, where you don't have to be nocturnal or knocked out. And we really are lacking in those, I think, for young people and for older people. But, you know, today my overwhelming feeling was that although a lot of the younger folks that were at this event yesterday have grown up in this social media world and, you know, with a phone in their hands since they were born and so on, and being able to text and, you know, take pictures and everything all the time, and everything's instant, I actually detected a huge amount of awkwardness amongst some of the young people I met last night, that they couldn't actually genuinely socially interact in real life. And I know this is something that's talked about in the media, but I was just very conscious of it yesterday. I suppose another thing I would say is that with Club Kali, I mean, on paper we're just a club, but outside of that, what we really do is about so much more, and it's very much about a community spirit and bringing people together from different cultures, but also across faith divisions and so on and so forth. So. I'd say that probably the thing that people complain about the most if they come to any of us for a chat is that, it's that feeling of isolation and loneliness. And again, it doesn't seem to leave people even when they're in a huge crowd.
Right. I think what you said, Ritu, at the end was where I was going to start, so that was a really good connection. So I was thinking about loneliness, and what does that really mean? Because you can be, feeling lonely in middle of a big crowd, and it's the fact of not being known, not being able to be oneself. And I think that's a particular thing, as I said, as Asians, as Indians, as LGBT people, where do we go to be known? And, how do we celebrate our festivals, do the things we want to do, and be ourselves? Because it's often, okay, I can celebrate my festival as, I can go to Diwali, just put myself in the closet for that event, or, celebrate Eid, or whatever that is, that we have to be someone other than, our authentic selves. So I think, for me, I found this GIN network, which is Gay Indian Network, and it doesn't seem to be faith-related. It's just a group of people coming together to be oneself, and they have a social group as well as, a deeper thinking group. And I think those spaces are really important. And also I've heard that there's the first LGBT retirement home that's come about here. And I think I read one about in India as well. There was a transgender one. So I think thinking about as we get older, where do we go? Because we may not have children, we may not have the same extended family. That's an issue. And also the great Asian myth of we all look after each other, we're all family together. Well, actually, no, it's not like that. And that compounds the problem sometimes, because we're expecting to be suffocated with family, and actually we're isolated a lot of the time.
Interesting. I'm going to open it up to the audience because I'm conscious of time. Hands up. We do have a roving mic. Anybody got any questions? Yes? And just make it clear if it's for the panel or any one particular speaker.
Hi there. Given the so I'm Muslim background, but I am very open about what I like and what I don't. But given the kind of religious fever that's kind of caught up just now in the Islamic world, how do you open up a safe place with those people that don't feel comfortable talking about these things? And I'm genuinely thinking about some of my Asian friends, Muslim and Sikh, that they'll be open with me because they know I don't care, I'll never judge them, but they will never open up with their families, with their friends, with their religious community, because we haven't actually had a chance to open that dialogue yet, the same way maybe the church has, for example. So what can we do differently in the Islamic community to kind of bring that
Kakan,
home?
that has to be you.
Just repeat the question again, please. No. What can we do differently for people who are not coming out overall? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so I think for me it's more like, in the Islamic world, religion seems to be taking hold, and not in a good way. And it seems to be fostering a lot of narrow-mindedness, and it seems to be closing a lot of that dialogue up that you could have had. So is there a way we could, for example, reach out to imams that are a bit more moderate and start getting them to understand and accept that people are going to be gay, and it might not be acceptable in the Quran, for example, but actually it is a part of life?
Well, what I find now is that a lot of people who contact me, because I've got my group up in Birmingham, a lot of people who contact me worldwide, most of it, strangely enough, is predominantly Muslim people who contact me, and they also talk about the Quran in particular, the family pressures, the religious pressures as well. So what I try to do is I ask them, first of all, is whether or not they've read the Quran for a start, and some of them have, a lot of them haven't. That's one thing. What I encourage people to do is go off and read the Quran, particularly that reference that they make to the story of Lut or Lot, and ask them to research that, look at the themes and the issues that are discussed in that particular story, and then consider whether or not they want to move forward with it. Because when I was coming out all them years ago, in order to understand myself, and because I was experiencing anxiety and depression at the time as well, I read the Quran and the Bible to make sense of it all. And really, when I think about how men in particular focus on the story of Lut, and it's only about half a dozen verses, if that, and how it's corrupted over time and time again. And what we're learning really is learning it by rote. I mean, I never knew the Quran and that story until I read it myself, but for years I was told that homosexuality is haram, it's forbidden, it's a sin. And then you wake up one day and you realise that You know, I'm quite a compassionate person. I'm kind, considerate, respectful, accepting. I learn all that. I use the Quran as a moral compass for myself and guidance. And so when people come to me and say, what do I do? How do I navigate this? I ask them, first and foremost, go and research the Quran and listen to people and talk to people. What do they understand about what it means to be a good Muslim? Currently, the climate being what it is that we've got a rise in Islamophobia and homophobia, unfortunately. So again, it's about how, it goes back to that slide, about how we connect as humans. And in particular with families, Muslims in particular, it's about learning to find your own voices, having the confidence to challenge what you're being taught through the family. I know some people are out within certain circles, like whether they might be out at work or social or certain friends, but they're not out 24/7. And when I say out, what I advocate more now is being authentic. And I just want people to lead their lives as best as they can and to challenge it in a way that is not harmful or detrimental to their own well-being, but in order that they understand. I really appreciate those who are financially independent and they're secure and they've got a career and they're away from the family home and they're learning about themselves and they're learning about, you know, getting on with their lives, really. But it's those, my concern is those who are still within the family home, are of a lesser, younger age, and they're the ones who are feeling that pressure on their mental health. And it's them, the ones that I want to reach out to and say, it's going to be okay.
Does anybody else on the panel want to come in? Because I'm keen to get other questions in as well. So
I was thinking about, you know, how we can help with loneliness, and it's a sense of being mirrored, whether it's in films like this, or I recently saw Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga. You know, just having that experience of, I see me reflected in the world, I see my experience reflected in the world, is really important. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Oh.
I think it's really important as well that people do, if you've got the confidence that you do make yourself more visible and more sort of become the role model in the community or in the society, because that's something that we're lacking very much, aren't we now?
Yeah, but I would also, you know, maybe as a psychotherapist, I would say there's a bit of caution. I don't think, you know, we can deal with all the homophobia in the world, and sometimes we have to also, like you said, protect ourselves, because sometimes you can put yourself in harm's way and it will detriment your well-being, and it's not going to win the battle anyway. So it's about looking after oneself and doing, you know, being out and proud where you can.
I think there was a line in one of the films of, you don't have to be fully out and doing everything, you just have to be honest with yourself. Yeah. That's the starting point.
And it's honesty that brought the Stonewall riots.
Very timely. Happy Pride. Any other questions?
So I've got the microphone.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting you mentioned that, because I'm just going to do a little shout out about Black Pride on the 7th of July, because I work for a mental health trust and I'm the LGBTQ lead. And we are having a stall, and it is a space for BAME LGBTQ people to come and say hello, find out some information about mental health and say hi, we're here.
Did you have a question?
No, it was a shout out, shameless shout out, just because you were talking about spaces and the lack of them. And because I actually work in Newham, I'm very interested in actually putting together a focus group for BAME LGBTQ people, because I see very little of people having a visibility in the borough that I work in. So
just a quick announcement. After this, when we finish, we only have a few more minutes. We're going to go through that door and there is a room with drinks, so we can continue those conversations. So do stick around. Does anybody have any other questions? Because if not, I do. Yes, Polemy.
I think it reminds me of some of the conversations last year, and I'm just trying to find out, because class hasn't been talked about. I do a lot of workshops with, when you said about within our communities, imams, etc. I do workshops in northwest London, and it's pretty isolated culturally generally, but I'm finding more and more younger, I suppose South Asians, but mainly Muslim background, but mixed as well, Iranian, Somali, young people coming to us at USA Park, wanting one-to-one sort of art, but also that mentoring thing. And I found that it actually makes a difference in terms of class a lot, because they're not very well, they don't come from wealthy backgrounds, they're not out, They really are worried about coming out, and we've got a Christian church even up the road, which the vicar won't even talk to us because we're queer positive in the work we do. So I've found actually in London it might represent other places, and I think the more that we've pushed, if you could talk a bit more about the more we push these barriers out, the more successes we have, the more pushback I think we're having, hence the homophobic attacks in London. I'm seeing a lot of that as well in northwest London, i.e. Hillingdon, Ealing, Brent, Harrow, where we're based, on the streets. And one of the things I do want to say as well, because people who work within the mayor's office or who have access maybe to organisations or where capital, basically money, maybe we could start thinking about co-housing, which is my big thing for the last 5 years, with community spaces. Maybe middle class, LGBT, South Asians need to start talking to each other and creating spaces like, sorry, I don't know your name, you mentioned about the retirement place.
Oh, Mira.
Yeah, maybe some of us have to actually start doing that, and I would love to talk to anybody that you know who'd be up for it.
Okay, well, do stick around because we have got drinks and conversations. I guess the question in that is about how we are overcoming these barriers. We've talked a lot about barriers and stigma and shame and all of that, and it's reflected in the films. But how do we overcome it? I mean, this and class as well, and that's a class and experience, and it's a big part not only in those films but also here too. We are a class society. So how do we overcome that? And the one thing I want to draw out is from the NHS, and you'll be familiar with this, there's 5 ways to well-being. And they are connect, be active, take notice, learn, and give. So how do we overcome these challenges? How do you do personally, or what works for you? Anyone of you take it. Go on, read it. Collective well-being or your own personal well-being?
Okay, personally, dog walking.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes. I hear you.
It connects me with the local community. There's the exercise, the fresh air. And you know what? For me, now at this stage in my life, not immersing myself completely in LGBT questions and worries all the time, it's my way of preserving my own mental health, quite frankly. So, but I think with regard to what we can do collectively, I think Polomi's suggestion is a very good one, and also Gakan is already doing this in Birmingham with Finding a Voice. But there needs to be more groups, more activities, and more coming together of people who are solid and committed and want to make a difference and actually put something constructive and tangible out there. And actually what you said, Gakan, about how few people turned up to the SBS meeting yesterday. I mean, that might have been partly like a publicity or people not understanding what it was about or a little bit last minute or something. But we know there's always been a lack of people that will actually put their money where their mouth is and actually go and do something. It's very easy now, again, with the social media world, for all of us to be keyboard warriors, but not actually take any action. And so we really do need more people to come forth, especially with people with energy to do it.
Vanessa, I'm going to turn to you actually. So again, collective or personal well-being, how do you cope, or any ideas?
Thank you. So I was actually thinking, so the organisation I work for, Fearless Futures, so I think in a lot of ways the work we do speaks to this, because on the one hand we work with schools, we work with to empower, as I said, young students who are self-identify as women or as non-binary, and we kind of give them the tools to be able to understand the world around them, how society is structured, how policies and how things are designed in a way to exclude them. And so we kind of help them develop kind of that, I guess, that confidence and that ability to deconstruct, but find support through each other. And it's kind of done in a peer way that supports one another. And then they go on and train other people in their school and share this kind of mentorship idea with what they've learned through this intersectional lens. And I think that's one way, through education. And on the other side of how we work is we work with leadership in big big corporations, and we make them understand understand the root causes of inequality through an intersectional lens, and how race, class, disability, and how all those things interact to create different identities, and kind of help them understand that, creating, I don't know, like a scheme for women, and why that doesn't work, because you're excluding trans women, you're excluding black women, you're excluding, all these other groups. You're only successful in getting white women into those schemes, for example. And so we help them understand and sit with that uncomfortableness to understand their own privilege. And that's a really powerful way that we work. So I think these kind of education trainings is something I believe in really strongly, and that's why I joined Phyllis Futures.
I think there's loads to be said about collectively how to overcome stigma and prejudices, but I think for me personally, I have the group which is called Finding a Voice, South Asians LGBT, and the reason why I looked at calling it South Asian LGBT is because I don't believe that as a South Asian community we should have divisions like Hindu versus Sikh versus Muslims, etc. Because for me, the subcontinent of India initially was just one big whole continent where everybody integrated. There was not much segregation, according to the history books. So that was one reason why I called it South Asian LGBT. In terms of mental health and how to overcome things, what I do personally is I bake, I do photography, I do gardening, I like my interior design, I read, I listen to books, I socialise quite a bit. But I'm also a keyboard warrior, but I've used that in a way that connects people. In the last couple of months, I've gained 2,000 Twitter followers. Yay! But the reason why I champion that is because I thought that globally, that's the only way that South Asians, LGBT people can come together. That was the only medium that I could use, the only tool. A couple of years back, I tried to do an online campaign, and I put out there, if you're #Asian, put your photo up. At that time, I only had about 3 people respond. I tried it again a few months back, and it went up to about 70 to 80. I think Lax was part of that. And what I'm using the social media as a tool to campaign and become an activist. And really, that's a good way to connect people. My hashtag that I use once in a while is #GaysianRevolution, because I believe that with social media, we can have our own Stonewall movement. And if you're an ally or you are South Asian LGBT and you want your voice heard, please use that hashtag. Collectively, what I think what we need to do is have spaces. Like last year, as I said, I had the conference South Asian LGBT. Earlier this year, there was a Muslim LGBT conference. I've recently done a mental health event, and I'm hopefully working on celebrating women event at some point. And I keep constantly thinking about what events can I create to bring people together. And I'm even talking about having maybe a multi-faith LGBT conference as well, or something really creative. But at the end of the day, it's always about how to make it better, not just for me, but for the people coming through and the next generation. Because as I said, I was lacking it back then, and I certainly don't want the next future generation to come through and lack the same tools and facilities as what I did.
I think that being LGBT and Asian requires a great deal of pride, a great deal of courage. In the film they talked about Atma Vishwas, the faith in your soul. So there's so much courage that's needed. And I think, I would say probably as a therapist, that therapy is quite useful. I had it myself as part of my counselling and psychotherapy training. And I think, it needs to be social and psychological, not one or the other. And one of the things I would say is through Daniel recently, I heard about the Pink Dot movement.
Yes.
And there's a picnic on the 13th of July
yes, first one,
for
Pink
Asian
Dot
people and their family and friends, as allies. And it's a way of being Asian and being LGBT. Have a picnic, bring food, talk to each other. And also, I think stories of courage and resilience. For me, and I haven't said this publicly before, but I probably had the first Hindu wedding in the country in 2014. And we had a Hindu priest. And in order to do that, I had to Google a great deal of who had done this in the world before and how did they do it. And, I made my personal choice that I didn't want that to be a political event. I knew when the priest said, Kanya Bulao, that, you know, I was making history, but that was enough for me to know it. It wasn't meant to be a political event. So, and this is the first time I'm sharing it, so hopefully, you know, the idea of having role models, as Kakan said, as DJ Ritu said, role models really helps us to say, I can have the courage to do it too. But where do we share those stories? Because we often talk about pride as the juxtaposition against the shame that we have. But, you know, one of the meetings we were going to have in Gin recently was stories of courage and resilience. And I think just telling our stories and having them validated and bearing witness to each other is really important. And maybe more of those spaces.
I do second that. I mean, 2 days ago I was at the start of the LGBTQ group, and we did coming out as roundtable. It's therapeutic to hear, to share. And one person disclosed that they'd just come out recently, in a round of applause. It does work. And there are a number of other organisations too. I'm just mindful that we do have to wrap up, so I'm going to save that bit for the drinks in the room next door. You will also find that you would have been given a slip about the films. It's like a feedback thing. If you can mark how you found this event, and then at the end, for the closing gala at London Indian Film Festival, they just basically mark all the films, and the highest winning audience film gets an award. So please do that. I'm just going to have to thank our panellists. So DJ Ritu, Mira Kapadia, Kakan Qureshi, and Vanessa Christophers.
Can I just do a quick...
Because you're my friend, you can.
I just, very quickly, whatever you do, this is what I believe in, whatever you do, take the holistic approach and think of the word or acronym SPICES. SPICES means socially, physically, intellectually, culturally, emotionally, sexually, or spiritually. If it meets those needs, if anything that you do in your life meets any of those needs, ticks any of those things, then you're on your way to being very confident, and it'll help you stabilise your mental health and well-being.
Thank you, great ending. So the S of the SPICES is socialise through that door for drinks and networking. Do join us.